Hey guys, welcome to the, the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Acts chapter 15. Now, I'm going to resist the urge to go deeper, but I'm going to get into the chapter itself. The reason why I'm making this statement is that the last couple of few studies, we kind of been talking about really the conflict between salvation by works, good deeds, holy living, um, all summed up under the umbrella of the law. In other words, all those ideologies, when we think about even the modern day, the modern day, how we may phrase it, when you hear the term, uh, the argument, let's say the argument of once saved, always saved. You know, those who argue against the notion that once you get saved, that you are actually saved. Um, and but they all fall under the umbrella of the law. You start with the law of Moses because that's where all of the ideals of living right by good deeds, living rights to be justified, um, doing all these good deeds in order to, as people will say, make heaven your home. And then I did share a little video, which I'm not going to share, of Pastor Marvin Sapp's statement. And the only reason why I shared that video, the statement represents Christianity. Most Christians today believe they must do something by way of living right, good deeds. Here's another phrase. If you just, and again, I'm going to resist to get into it, but what happens if you die in unconfessed sin? Do you go to heaven? You know, and there's a whole thing that we could go on in there as I go to Acts 15. But that, living under that cloud of fear, okay? Because again, I won't go into it because again, I am tempted. But Acts 15 verse 1 says, some men came down from Judea and began to teach the brothers. So we talked about these Judaizers. Some were Pharisees, under the Pharisees. And again, I asked the question, why did the apostles allow this? So he says, unless you are circumcised according to the customs prescribed by Moses, you cannot be saved. Popular, again, phrase, so you cannot be saved. Now, verse 2, but after Paul and Barnabas had engaged them in serious argument and debate, the church arranged for Paul and Barnabas and some of the others of them to go up to the apostles and elders in Jerusalem concerning this controversy. Now, think about what Luke is reporting here, how important the Jerusalem church, how important the apostles were. Now, what is interesting is that the apostles then, by this time, are not the only clear authority. They should have been. In other words, when they take this matter up, we're going to see Peter is going to address the crowd. That should have been it. However, you're going to see James, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but you're going to see James, the Lord's brother, who is the leader of the church. More on him in a moment. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is that the apostles were given the keys of the kingdom. The apostles were given the truths of the kingdom. So remember, they were there with Jesus in John 3:16. They were there with Jesus in John 5:24. Just to name a few. They were there when Jesus spoke those words. They should have been the voice of truth. Verse 3, when they had been sent on their way by the church, by the way, that means financially the church sent them on their way. They passed through both Phoenicia and Samaria, explaining in detail, the conversion of the Gentiles, and they created great joy among all the brothers. Good news. When they arrived at Jerusalem, they were welcomed by the church, the apostles, and the elders, and they reported all that God had done with them. So, okay, great reception, great testimony. Look at what God is doing among the Gentiles. And that was, you could say, excuse me, Paul's pride and joy with the fruit that God was doing, the salvation that God was harvesting among the Gentiles, the non-Jewish believers. However, the Jewish believers wasn't that thrilled. Look at verse 5. But some of the believers from the party of the Pharisees stood up and said, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses. Now again, I'm asking, why did this persist? Who were these guys? Why did the Pharisees of all groups have a voice? And it kind of shows, why did James, the Lord brother? Now, notice he says the apostles were there, the church. Now, the church is going to be under the leadership of James, the Lord's brother. And then he said the elders, so the leading body. And then notice what he says, the apostles. Okay, the apostles. Now, as I just said, the apostles should have had really the final voice. You see, what we call foundational apostles, okay, that's just the title in a sense. The reason why we call them foundational apostles is that Jesus gives them, let me illustrate it this way. Because let's say if I was conversing with the Pharisees, and notice he's calling them believers, but some of the believers from the party of the Pharisees stood up. So we could call them Messianic Jews, believers in Jesus. However, they were still holding on to the law. Now, the law, again, is the mother of all of denominations. The law of Moses, the works of the law, salvation by the works of the law, the deeds of the law is the mother of all work salvation doctrine. Whenever you hear, as they say, people who say that you have to live right in order to be saved. They're saying that based upon the commands of the Old Testament law. Okay? So in one form or another. So the fact that the Pharisees had a voice at all is shocking. These were the same group, remember, that killed Jesus. And notice they had poison. Paul would put it this way, that under the law, under the Passover meal, you had to eat unleavened bread. That means unseasoned. You had to eat it raw, kind of bland. The season represented contamination. Okay? So he says, now if I was conversing with the Pharisee. If I'm saying, okay, look, this argument right here. The reason why the apostles should have been the final word, certainly not the Pharisees. But watch this. You see their influence. So why do I say the apostles were the foundation? Okay. So just like God had given Moses the law, he appears to Moses several times during the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, starting from, of course, the burning bush, the exodus from Egypt through the Red Sea. He established Moses as his spokesman. God says in Numbers chapter 12, when Miriam and Aaron said, why do we have to listen to Moses? Is God only speaking through Moses? It was a good question, but ooh, right? You asked to, so God decided, he goes, no, Moses, I got this. I'll answer this. He has Miriam and Aaron step forth. He says, now, if there is just a normal prophet, everyday card carrying prophet, I still will reveal myself to him. And then he says, not so with Moses. He speaks to me face to face. Now watch this. In fact, you know what? Let me go to this. This is going to be good to hear. Numbers chapter 12, because I want to establish something. I want to establish something to show you why this is important. How the effect even today. So Numbers chapter 12, verse 1 says, Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman or a black woman. They said, does the Lord speak only through Moses? Does he not also speak through us? I can say, ooh, bad. Good question. Valid question. But watch what happened. And the Lord heard it. Moses was a very humble man, more so than any man on the face of the earth. Wow. Suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, you three come out of the tent of the meeting. So the three of them went out, and the Lord descended in the pillar of a cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent. So God shows up. And he summons Aaron and Miriam. When the two of them came forward, he said, listen to what I said. If there is a prophet among you from the Lord, I make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my household. I speak with him directly, openly, not in riddles. He sees the form of God. So why were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the Lord anger burned against him, and he left. Now, it goes on to really say when he left, that right there, when he left, Miriam and Aaron were lepers, and Moses pleaded for them. But I want you to go back, look at what he says here. The reason why I'm bringing this out is because what God established is that Moses was the voice of God. He was the standard of truth when he spoke. So now if you have a question, right? Now you go back to Miriam's questions like, doesn't God speak with us? The answer is no. Not like that. Moses is the voice of God when he speaks. How do we know that? Because God validated Moses' voice. He validated Moses' voice. Moses as his spokesman. I'm sorry. He validated Moses as his spokesman. Now, that doesn't mean that they were the leaders. Aaron would become the chief of the priest, the whole tribe of Aaron. The Levite tribe would be through because of Aaron. Now, the point I wanted to say is, so now if you had a dispute, in other words, what does God think about this? Well, if Moses said, this is God's thoughts on that, it's now established because God established Moses as his spokesman. Now, when we come to the New Testament, and this is important here, that when we come to the New Testament, we see God, Jesus, for 3 years carried 12 disciples who later became apostles. They ate with him, talked with him, they heard him, he taught them, he personally, right, trained them. So what happens? They become the spokesman of the New Testament, the foundation of the New Testament. So later, God, and how do we know this? Then God validated them first by empowering them with the Holy Spirit, we see in Acts 2. And then as the ministry went on, it said that they gave testimony of the word through signs and wonders. Right? This is important because I'm going to tell you how, to me, how bad even denominations have come. How bad all of these different ideologies, Christian ideologies, because you see the example here. So when you have these Judaizers, Jews, who are pushing the law of Moses, the apostles should have been first and foremost to be able to stand up and says, this is what the Lord taught. This is what the Lord taught. It should not have been that they were that these Judaizers even taught this statement that you must notice what he said to them. He said in verse 5, but some of them that believe in the but some of the believers from the party of the Pharisees stood up and said it is necessary to circumcise them. And then watch this, and command them to keep the law of Moses. Now, the whole entire letter of Galatians is based upon this statement. He would later have to deal with this also in Galatia, in the region of Galatia. We deal with it today because of the, again, salvation by work, whether it's Catholicism, every denomination in some form or fashion teaches that you must do something, you must work, do good deeds, live right in order to be heaven, in order to get to heaven. That is what the principle right here. This is the mother that keeps giving birth. That's what you see here. But what is to me more shocking is you had the apostles that allowed this. Now, you had the apostles who were taught by Jesus. This party, the believers from the party of the Pharisees, never should have that voice. I'm not saying they should not have been welcome in the church. Sure, you can welcome in the church. They still could have been Pharisees, just as Joseph and Nicodemus were. But they never ever should have had this voice in the church. And this, and even from here, they wouldn't stop. You see the poison that they even spread in Galatia. This never should have happened. And the apostles, who were the voice of the New Testament, whom God validated as he did Moses, this voice never should have persisted. We'll pick this up in the next study. And I am going to slow through this because, again, the impact of this is still felt today. Just pick a denomination and you're going to see the same problems. And I said before that Catholicism did more damage. We still haven't overcome the damage that Catholicism has done in their doctrine, because their doctrines of salvation by good deeds, by faith and works. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I will see you in the next study.